Hi, I'm Lyria. On the day I was supposed to be the happiest bride in the room, I stood there, bouquet in hand, listening to my fiancé and his groomsmen laugh. He said, and I'll never forget, "Just thinking about living in the same house with that fat pig makes me sick." He was talking about my mother. Everyone laughed, but I didn't. I smiled, because they thought they were marrying silence. But I was already planning their collapse, and by nightfall, he'd be the one begging me for mercy. Before we begin, tell me, what time is it where you are? And have you ever smiled while breaking? Let's begin. The air in Napa Valley always smells like money. Fresh grapes, old wood, and the faint sweetness of champagne that never stops flowing. That evening, the whole vineyard shimmered in gold, the kind of gold you only see in glossy magazines, or the kind of lives that never had to worry about late payments or gas bills. And yet, there I was, standing in the middle of it, wearing a dress that cost more than the bakery my mother built from nothing, pretending I belonged. My name is Lyria, 36 years old, self-made, and foolish enough to think marrying into the Grant family would be an equal partnership. They came from old money, which really just means they've been arrogant for generations. I built myself from scratch. They were born with their silver cutlery engraved before birth. Mom sat at a small corner table near the restroom, an afterthought, as if the seating chart had run out of room for working-class mothers. I had begged the planner to place her near me, but apparently the lighting was better over there. Everyone else's tables glowed with roses and crystal. Hers had a plain cloth and no centerpiece. The irony stung more than I wanted to admit. When I looked at her, she smiled, tired but proud. Maribel. She used to wake up at 3 in the morning, covered in flour, humming while shaping dough. She'd tell me, "You can make anything rise, mija, if you give it enough patience and warmth." Her hands built everything I am, and now those same hands rested quietly on her lap, unnoticed, in a room full of people who would never see her as more than the baker's widow. The sun was slipping lower, painting everything in soft orange. Guests murmured over wine and oysters, laughter mixing with the rustle of satin gowns. I was adjusting my veil when I heard Ronan's laugh, sharp, confident, the kind that fills a room because it's used to owning it. He stood near the wine bar with his groomsmen, whiskey in hand, looking every inch the perfect groom in a designer suit that fit like arrogance. One of them asked, "Your mother-in-law's here already?" Ronan chuckled, swirling his drink. "Yeah, just thinking about living with that fat pig makes me sick." For a moment, I didn't understand. My body froze before my mind caught up. My throat went dry, the sounds around me distorted. Laughter erupted, loud, easy, cruel. It rippled through the air like the popping of champagne corks. Everyone laughed, everyone but me. I turned slowly, eyes finding him through the crowd. His hand rested casually in his pocket, his mouth curved in that smug little half-smile that once made me believe he was charming. I didn't move, didn't cry, didn't even blink. I just smiled. People say silence is weakness. They're wrong. Silence, when you know what it's worth, is the sharpest weapon. I smiled because if I opened my mouth, the wrong kind of words might spill out, words that would ruin more than a wedding. I smiled because I needed him to think I didn't hear, because I'd learned long ago that the quietest person in the room is usually the one who's watching everything. Across the hall, Mom shifted in her seat, unaware. She lifted a linen napkin embroidered with the faded logo of her bakery. Maribel's Oven. She always carried one, like a lucky charm. A waiter passing by knocked over a glass, and red wine spilled across the white fabric. Ronan turned, his face tightening. "Don't worry, it's just a napkin," he said, annoyed, like she'd offended him by existing. Something inside me twisted, tight and cold. My fingers clenched around the bouquet so hard that a thorn dug into my palm. The pain steadied me. That stained napkin wasn't just a piece of cloth anymore. It was a mark, a beginning. The ceremony started. The music was beautiful, of course. Everything was beautiful. The Grants wouldn't allow otherwise. When I walked down the aisle, every camera turned toward me, every guest sighed at the perfect couple. But in my chest, something had gone still. The vows blurred together. The officiant's words felt far away. I looked at Ronan, at his perfect posture and perfect smile, and wondered how many people in this room had practiced the art of pretending. Dinner followed. Toasts began. Crystal clinked. Ronan's best man gave a speech about the joining of two great families. The Grants were praised for their legacy, their taste, their hospitality. My name came up a few times. My mother's, never. When the applause died down, I caught Mom's eyes across the room. She smiled, gentle and dignified, as if none of it touched her. But I knew better. I knew that kind of quiet, the kind that hums in your chest like the space before thunder. I smiled back, but mine felt different. That was the moment I decided something no one else knew yet. People think betrayal happens all at once, like a slap. But the truth is, it seeps in slowly. Through small humiliations, through laughter that shouldn't have happened, through words like fat pig that echo louder than vows. The rest of the evening passed like a dream I couldn't wake from. I danced, laughed, posed for pictures. Ronan's hand rested on my waist. His smile fooled everyone. He kissed my cheek and whispered something about appearances, and I almost laughed, because appearances were all he had. When the last song faded and the crowd cheered, I caught my reflection in the tall mirror behind the bar. The bride everyone envied. The woman who had it all. My lips curved again into that same calm, quiet smile. Everyone thought I was smiling because I was happy, but I was smiling because I already knew. By the end of this day, he'd regret ever opening his mouth. He thought I'd forget. He didn't know I'd been planning my silence for years. Silence was my mother's weapon. I learned it from her, and I was about to use it. Back in the bridal suite, the noise of the reception faded behind the heavy oak door. I stood in front of the mirror, blotting the burgundy lipstick that never quite felt like mine. The room smelled like peonies and expensive hairspray. A vintage chandelier cast warm shadows along the cream-colored walls, but the light felt colder now, like it saw through me. My reflection looked flawless, the kind of flawless that sells fairy tales. But my hands told the truth. They trembled as I tried to reapply my lipstick, barely grazing my lower lip. The words were still playing on a loop in my head. That fat pig. And then the laughter, not just his, but the others. Grown men in tailored suits chuckling like frat boys. Every sound from earlier echoed like tiny cracks splintering across glass. Not broken, yet, but getting there. A knock came at the door. The wedding planner walked in with her usual overly bright smile and a leather-bound folder. "Hi, sweetheart. Just some post-ceremony paperwork for the two of you to sign. Standard legal stuff. The Grants like to have everything tidy, you know." I nodded. She placed the folder on the vanity table and disappeared just as quickly. I sat down and flipped it open. Inside were the post-nuptial agreements Ronan had mentioned a few days ago in passing. "Just sign it, babe. My mom's a stickler for legal clarity," he had said, tossing the manila envelope onto the kitchen counter like it was a grocery list. "It's nothing." I never got around to reading it. Too many cake tastings, last-minute fittings, and calls from my assistant. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But now, the lighting in this room made things sharper. I skimmed the documents quickly until one sentence jumped out and sliced clean through the fairy tale. All business equity contributions prior to marriage are recognized under the Grant Family Trust. I blinked, then read it again. My stomach sank. Every penny I had poured into Ronan's startup idea from my own bakery's earnings was now listed under their trust. Legally speaking, the money wasn't mine anymore. It never had been. They weren't marrying me. They were absorbing me. I stared at the page a moment longer, hearing the echo of Ronan's voice in my head. It's nothing. And just like that, the chill settled deeper. Not anger, not even heartbreak. Clarity. I remembered Mom's voice. Never fight them loud, honey. They'll use your noise against you. I picked up the pen. My signature flowed smoothly across the bottom of the page, steady despite my pulse pounding. Then, in cursive, smaller than a whisper, I wrote in the margin, "Subject to personal amendment, clause pending review." It was nothing legal, not yet, but it was mine. A placeholder, a protest, a seed. I slipped the document back inside the folder, fastened it, and walked out of the suite as if nothing had shifted. But everything had. The sun had dipped lower. The vineyard was bathed in honey-colored twilight. Warm light danced along the glasses on every table. From a distance, it looked like magic. Up close, it smelled like deception and overcooked salmon. I moved toward the reception hall, the clatter of silverware and low chatter growing louder with each step. As I reached the corridor, I slowed. Voices, low, sharp, drifted from the side alcove just before the doors. We're doing her a favor, letting her in," said a clipped feminine voice. I knew it instantly. Mrs. Grant. Her vowels always sounded like they were tasting something sour. Another voice, male and lazy. "She won't last. She's not one of us." Mrs. Grant again, dry and sure. "Ronan's too soft. He'll learn." My hand gripped the corner of the wall. I didn't step forward. I didn't flinch. I reached up and adjusted my earring, smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from my dress, and then I stepped inside the room. Chandeliers shimmered. Guests smiled. Ronan waved me over, already tipsy on compliments and champagne. I smiled back, the way I'd been taught. My silence sharpened. We toasted. I raised my glass. And as Ronan talked to a guest about some new investment strategy, I slid my phone from my clutch under the table and snapped a photo of the signed contract. I forwarded it to myself. No big move, no panic, just one more quiet step. I started building a backup path in my mind, financially, emotionally, legally, one I could walk if this turned darker, which it already had, because this wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction. And transactions can be rewritten. Dinner plates were cleared, speeches made, dessert served. Ronan's cousin stood to raise one more toast. He spoke about loyalty and family, about honor, and as he lifted his glass, Ronan turned to me. He held up the ring, gold, classic, and slipped it onto my finger with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You're mine now," he whispered. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice calm and measured. "I promise to honor truth, even when others hide behind it." He smiled again, assuming it was for him. But it wasn't. It was a promise I made to myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. The papers lay beside me, ink still drying, like a quiet declaration of war. I didn't sleep. The papers stayed beside me, untouched but heavy. Around 5:00 a.m., the first light crept through the window, coloring the white sheets a soft gold. Napa was quiet outside, fog clinging to the vineyard hills, the kind of silence that feels too clean to trust. I sat up slowly, rubbing the tightness from my eyes. My hand brushed the edge of the contract. For the first time, I didn't see it as a mistake. I saw it for what it really was. A map. Not to a dream, but out of a trap. Pulling the folder into my lap, I reread the line I had written in the margin the night before. Subject to personal amendment, clause pending review. It was subtle. It wouldn't hold up forever. But it was mine. A fracture in the polished armor they'd wrapped around me. I let out a long breath and stood, the cold floor pressing against the soles of my feet. The room smelled faintly of bridal perfume, roses, and something else. Regret, maybe. I walked over to the small table near the window and opened my laptop. A soft ping vibrated from my phone just as I sat down. I checked it. The scanned contract had arrived in my inbox, time-stamped. I didn't hesitate. I typed out a brief message and attached the file. To Naomi Cortez. Subject: if anything happens to me, keep this. I hovered over the send button for half a second before tapping it. Naomi and I weren't close in the daily sense. We lived on opposite coasts now, but some friendships are built like vaults, college roommates, shared dorm secrets. She was now a corporate attorney in San Francisco. Fierce, honest, no nonsense. I trusted her more than anyone in that vineyard. Closing my laptop, I looked at the bed, still pristine on Ronan's side. He hadn't come back after the reception. Some excuse about staying late with out-of-town cousins. I hadn't asked questions. I wouldn't have believed the answers anyway. Downstairs, I could hear faint clinking, staff setting up for the Grant family's traditional post-wedding breakfast. I had half a mind to skip it, but something pulled me down. Maybe I needed to see it one last time before I started pulling the threads. I showered, dressed in soft beige slacks and a white blouse, tied my hair into a low bun. I looked more like a corporate strategist than a bride, which felt fitting. The breakfast was held on the back terrace. Long tables dressed in white linens and hydrangeas. The Grants knew how to make things look beautiful, even when they were rotting underneath. Ronan's mother stood at the head table, her voice floating across the crowd with a practiced warmth. I'm so proud of my son's financial instincts. His work with the family trust has expanded it far beyond our expectations. The guests clapped politely, all smiles and mimosa sips. Ronan grinned and raised his glass. We wouldn't be here without her support, he said, nodding vaguely in my direction. The laughter that followed had teeth. I didn't need a translation. They thought he was joking about my bank account, my little bakery empire, a convenient punchline in a high society joke. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I watched. Who laughed first? Who looked down? Who reached for their drink and didn't meet my eyes? Every reaction became a note in my mental file, because when you're on the outside, the smartest thing you can do is listen. I excused myself midway through the fruit course, said I was tired. No one objected. No one asked if I was okay. In the car, I shut the door softly and dialed Naomi. She answered on the second ring. Lyria? I need to learn how to make an amendment stick, I said. A pause. Are you in trouble? I looked out the window as the vines slid by, neat rows rolling over hills like green waves. Not yet. But they will be. The line was quiet for a beat. Then her voice came through, measured, alert. Email me everything. I'll start looking at precedents. If this gets messy, it already is. Then I'm in, she said. And I'll be discreet. Thanks, I whispered. After we hung up, I sat in silence. The car turned off the private road and back onto the highway toward San Francisco. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The vineyard was growing smaller behind me, fading into the brightening morning. I looked at my reflection. My eyes didn't look like they used to. They looked colder, clearer, alive. For them, family was ownership. For me, it became evidence. 3 days passed in a blur of curated smiles and shallow check-ins. No one from the Grant family asked how I was adjusting to married life. No one expected me to say anything real anyway. By Thursday evening, I found myself standing in front of the Grant estate's towering mahogany doors. The butler opened them with a nod, and I stepped into the chandelier-lit dining hall, sterile, sparkling, and cold. The long table stretched farther than necessary, set with polished silver and wine glasses so thin they might shatter from a glance. Every seat had a name card tucked into an embossed holder, except mine. A server hovered nearby, looking unsure. He leaned toward me with a quiet voice. "Mrs. Grant said you could sit wherever you feel comfortable." Comfortable, as if that word belonged to me anymore. I scanned the table, then made my way to the far end, opposite Mrs. Grant, dead center at the other head. I took the seat slowly, smoothing my napkin into my lap. The scraping of my chair echoed just long enough to still the room. Forks paused mid-air. Conversation dipped, then resumed like a needle dragged across vinyl. I smiled gently and said, "This feels right." No one challenged me. But I saw the calculation in their glances, measuring how long it would take before I broke the unspoken rules. Dinner began with quiet clinks and muted voices. They talked about vineyard yields and charity auctions, legacy real estate and endowments. I sat still, listening, not because I had nothing to say, but because every word they dropped told me something they didn't mean to reveal. Mrs. Grant asked someone across the table about their Paris foundation. A cousin bragged about a condo in Lake Tahoe he'd never seen but somehow doubled in value. Someone mentioned hiring a new gardener because the old one had gotten too comfortable. They thought I was beneath them. But I was beginning to see them clearly. As people so terrified of losing power, they mistook cruelty for class. Under the table, I opened the Notes app on my phone and started typing with my thumb. Just fragments, names, dates, quotes. I told myself it was for business, but the truth, it was my beginning, my shift from hurt to hunter. Ronan raised his wine glass, half full and sloshing slightly. He was on his third pour, maybe fourth. "To my wife," he said, voice lazy with drink. "Who's learning our family's ways?" Slowly. A few guests chuckled. One even clapped. I lifted my own glass, steady. "To your family," I said. "Who taught me the importance of reading the fine print?" There was a pause, just long enough to feel like a tremor, before the laughter stumbled back in, thinner this time. Mrs. Grant's eyes narrowed, her lips frozen in a polite expression that didn't quite reach her brows. She cleared her throat. "We value tradition here." "Lyria, dear, I'm sure your upbringing was quite different." My fork paused near my plate. I looked directly at her, soft voice steady. "Yes, we valued honesty more than etiquette." The table held its breath, then released it with a chorus of awkward laughter. But I knew what I'd done. The pie arrived with dessert. Baked apple, warm and familiar, laced with cinnamon and vanilla, my mother's signature recipe. My throat tightened before I even took a bite. I looked up. "This tastes familiar." The cook, passing behind me, said easily, "Mrs. Grant asked for your mother's recipe. She said it would elevate the dish." My hand stayed frozen around my fork. I didn't let it shake. "She would have been proud," I said, looking right at Mrs. Grant, "to know it still sweetens your table." My voice was low, kind, but I saw her shoulders stiffen. That calm cut deeper than outrage ever could. When the last plates were cleared, guests began to leave in a slow trickle of silk gowns and cologne trails. Ronan barely noticed me as he followed his uncle outside to smoke. A few cousins gave me half smiles. A shrug. No one met my eyes for long. As I turned to leave, Mrs. Grant stepped beside me. Her tone was practiced sweetness with steel beneath. "A woman like you should know her place." I didn't flinch. I met her gaze, square and still. "I do," I said. "And it's not beneath you." Her eyes flickered. There it was, the first real crack. Every family has its secrets. Theirs were just easier to document. A week later, the house was asleep. The air was thick with ocean salt and the faint hum of waves crashing against the cliffs below. I sat alone in Ronan's study, the room half lit by the soft glow of a banker's lamp. The shelves were lined with leather-bound books, perfectly aligned, perfectly unread. His desk was a slab of polished walnut. cold, heavy, and hiding things it shouldn't. My phone was in my hand. I had been replaying the dinner recording for hours, marking timestamps where their jokes turned into liabilities. The sound of Ronan's voice mixed with his mother's, laughter dripping with arrogance, the kind of laughter people use when they think no one is listening. I wrote notes on a yellow legal pad: Grant Trust, mentions of tax shelter. Cousin Felix, insider info on the Napa acquisition. Each line was a breadcrumb leading somewhere dark. The only light came from the phone screen reflecting off my face. Everything else was shadows. Soft, still, dangerous. I went to delete a duplicate file when another audio file appeared. One I hadn't seen before. It was unmarked, no title, no timestamp, just a duration. 0417. Curiosity pushed harder than fear. I pressed play. Ronan's voice filled the quiet. Once the merger's finalized, I'll file for separation. She's not entitled to anything. Mom's lawyers made sure. I froze. The pen slipped from my fingers. Then her voice. Mrs. Grant, calm and confident. You should have seen her face at the dinner. She actually believes she belongs here. For a few seconds after it ended, I couldn't breathe. My pulse beat in my ears, drowning out the ocean. I dropped the phone, and the sound of it hitting the rug felt louder than thunder. I stared at the screen, their voices still echoing somewhere between disbelief and nausea. It wasn't just betrayal. It was choreography. They'd planned this long before I walked down that aisle. A laugh slipped out of me, short, sharp, empty. I wiped at a tear that refused to stay quiet. My throat burned as I whispered to no one, "You just made my decision easier." I picked the phone back up, turned on the recorder, and began to speak, my voice steadier than I expected. Journal entry, Day 7. They don't know I heard. They don't know I'm coming. I saved the file, labeled it only, for later. Something shifted inside me. The kind of shift you don't feel until it's too late to turn back. I began pulling open drawers, one after another, papers, receipts, letters, all neatly filed, except one folder that sat crooked in the corner. I pulled it free and flipped it open. Financial statements. My name on each one, my bakery's profits, transferred to the Grant Trust months before the wedding. Under my digital authorization, only it wasn't my signature. I stared at it, tracing the curves of my forged name with my finger. The precision made me sick. Someone had practiced that signature. I turned on the small office printer, waited as the light scanned each document, and printed duplicates. The sound of the machine cutting through the quiet was steady, almost comforting. I gathered the pages, folded them, and slipped them into a hollow space inside a cookbook in the kitchen. Sweet revenge. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I returned to the study, I sank onto the floor. The papers lay scattered like fallen leaves around me. I reached for the photo on Ronan's desk, the one of me and my mother at the bakery. She had flour on her cheek, eyes soft but strong. I touched her face through the glass. "I did this to protect us," I whispered. "And now I'm protecting us again." For a moment, the weight of it all pressed against my ribs. Betrayal, loss, exhaustion. But my mother's words rose from memory, quiet but clear. Never act when you're angry. Wait until you're ready to win. I breathed slowly, the sting behind my eyes cooling into something else. My hands stopped shaking. I stood, straightened my shoulders, and faced the window. The moonlight painted the ocean silver. Somewhere out there, the world went on, oblivious. I reached for my phone again and hit record. "They think they're building a legacy," I said softly. "I'm building evidence." My fingers moved with precision as I typed notes, organizing files, tagging dates, syncing everything to Naomi's secure drive. Each keystroke was a small rebellion, quiet, deliberate, irreversible. I glanced back at the dark hallway beyond the office door. The house slept peacefully, unaware that the foundation beneath it had just begun to crack. I leaned closer to the phone, voice dropping to a whisper. One day, they'll hear this. Not from me, but from the world. Before him, I was unafraid to fight. It was time she came back. 1 week later, I stood outside the towering glass doors of the Grant Foundation headquarters, the late afternoon sun reflecting sharp and gold against the steel frame. I tightened my grip on my coffee, not out of nerves, but because it felt like armor. It was warm in my hand, steady. The receptionist glanced up as I entered. Her polished smile flickered when I said my name. Mrs. Grant is expecting you, I think, she added, then tapped her earpiece and murmured something I couldn't quite hear. A pause. Then she nodded toward the elevator. I didn't take offense. I didn't need her courtesy. I wasn't here for recognition. I was here for the first move. The meeting room was clinical and cold, with a long black table, chrome accents, and the kind of chairs designed for intimidation, not comfort. I was the first to arrive. I chose a seat in the middle, not at the head, not in the shadows, center stage. Minutes later, Ronan strolled in, followed by 2 PR reps and a young intern clutching folders like a lifeline. Everyone smiled a little too wide. Ronan kissed my cheek in front of them, like a politician caught mid-campaign. We're glad you could join us, he said smoothly. We're just going to review the presentation for next month's public rollout. The intern passed me a folder, my name printed on a glossy cover above the logo of my old bakery. I flipped it open slowly. Every detail of my brand, the story, the packaging, the recipes, had been folded neatly into the Grant Foundation's image. My name was there, but not my consent. No outrage, just clarity. I shut the folder and set it gently back on the table. You'll need my written permission for this merger to hold, I said, and you don't have it. Silence snapped across the room like a wire pulled tight. One of the PR reps shifted uncomfortably. The intern stopped breathing. Ronan blinked, caught off guard. I stood and pushed the folder slightly toward him. I'll see myself out. I walked past them, calm, slow, the click of my heels echoing in the quiet. In the elevator, Ronan caught up with me just before the doors closed. Lie, come on, this is all just paperwork, he said, voice half laughing, half warning. I looked him in the eye. You said that once before. You should have read the margin. He didn't reply. The doors closed between us. Later that evening, I was back at my apartment, the sky outside turning a soft, dusty pink. I stood by the window, watching the city breathe below. Then I sat at my old desk, the one from the early bakery days, and reopened the bakery's dormant social media account. My fingers moved without hesitation. I uploaded a short video, just the slow movement of flour-dusted hands shaping dough. No music, no narration. Just the caption, "Every legacy begins with truth." I clicked post. Within an hour, the notifications started. Shares. Comments. DMs from old vendors, small business owners, women I hadn't spoken to in years. No names were mentioned, but everyone understood. The flour said enough. By midnight, Ronan's PR team was in full damage control. I knew because 2 reporters had already emailed asking for a statement. I didn't reply. I wasn't giving them a story. I was becoming it. That night, I sat in the dark, listening again to that recording. Ronan and his mother, their voices soaked in cruelty. My phone glowed in my hand, but no tears came this time. Just a tightening of my jaw. You think I'm the same girl who stayed quiet at the wedding? I whispered to the silence. I'm not. I deleted Ronan's contact, then his mother's, and the rest of the families, one by one, like wiping dust from glass. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. The city felt lighter. I brewed my coffee, opened my laptop, and checked the bakery inbox. Dozens of messages. Support, Questions, quiet encouragements from people who knew what it felt like to be erased and still rise. At 9:12 a.m., Ronan's email arrived. Subject line: "We need to talk. Dinner tonight." I didn't hesitate. Reply: "Of course." Then I opened my planner and wrote beneath today's date, in ink, Stage 1 complete. In war, you don't strike first, you let them invite you to. By evening, the sky over San Francisco had turned into a dark satin backdrop, the bridge glittering in the distance like a stitched silver line. I arrived early, the city lights flickering off the restaurant's windows as I stepped inside. The hostess greeted me with a soft smile and escorted me to the private dining room upstairs. The table was set for 3. Of course. Ronan stood as I approached, smoothing the sleeves of his jacket like a nervous groom. His mother was already seated, posture rigid, eyes cool behind her pearl-rimmed glasses. She hadn't been invited in any formal way, but her presence wasn't a surprise. "Of course you're here," I said, folding my coat neatly over the back of the chair across from them. She responded with a clipped nod. "We thought it best to clear the air." A waiter arrived with champagne. Ronan raised his glass. "To clarity and forgiveness," he said, smiling like it meant something. I held my glass, but didn't drink. Small talk came first. The weather. A gallery opening they'd attended. A mention of one of Ronan's business partners, the one I knew had doctored the foundation's quarterly numbers. I let it pass without flinching, let them feel like they were winning. Then came the folder. Ronan slid it across the table slowly, the way a dealer lays down the last card in a high-stakes game. "A small update to the agreement," he said. "Just to protect everyone. Nothing binding, just routine." I opened it. A non-disclosure agreement. Legal language designed to look harmless, but it was meant to silence me. Not just about finances, but about everything. The family, the fraud, the forgery. My life. "It's just a formality," he added. I closed the folder gently. "You've always had a thing for paperwork," I said, smiling without warmth. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a small voice recorder, set it on the table. The red light blinked once. Then again. Mrs. Grant straightened. Ronan's jaw twitched. "Just for accuracy," I said, voice calm. "You've taught me how important that is." There was a beat of silence so sharp it rang. Mrs. Grant was the first to break. "After everything we've done for you." I leaned forward, voice still low. "You mean taking my bakery's profits, my mother's recipe, and my dignity?" Ronan's voice cracked. "You're exaggerating." "Am I?" I turned my phone around, screen glowing. An email from Naomi. Attached. Audio files, legal timestamps, a copy of the financial document with the forged signature. My signature. The one I never gave. "You filed paperwork in my name," I said. "You stole from me." His face lost its color. His mouth opened, but no words followed. The waiter returned with dessert, something delicate, dusted with powdered sugar and too pretty to eat. No one touched it. I lifted my glass. "To honesty," I said. "Finally on record." Ronan's hand trembled as he reached for his water. Mrs. Grant forced a smile. "You wouldn't ruin us. You're still family." I set the glass down slowly. "No, I was never family. I was just the evidence you couldn't erase." What they didn't know was that the recorder on the table was synced live to Naomi's cloud drive, everything from hello to that last sip of champagne, preserved, backed up, and already out of their hands. Ronan leaned in, voice low. "You'll regret crossing us." I stood. "I already did," I said. "Once." I pulled a few bills from my clutch, placed them beside the untouched dessert, and left without looking back. Outside, the night air met me like truth. Sharp. Clean. I walked to the edge of the viewing deck. The bridge lights shimmered, and the bay below was endless and dark. I slipped off my wedding ring, a small, cold circle of illusion, and let it drop. They'll spend months trying to fix this, patch the leaks, rewrite the narrative, smooth the headlines, but I had drawn the first real line, and no amount of polish could erase the stain underneath. By sunrise, every Grant in San Francisco was calling their lawyer. I woke up to my phone vibrating non-stop. Messages, missed calls, news alerts, all stacking like dominoes. The morning light spilled through the blinds, slicing the quiet of my small apartment. On the screen, Naomi's name blinked at the top of the notifications. Naomi. It's done. The clips are live. I sat up, my heart steady but my hands trembling just slightly. I opened the news app. The video had spread faster than wildfire. The dinner, the voices, the threats, every word. The hashtags flashed across every feed. Hashtag Grant Scandal, #Sweet Revenge, #Family for Profit. Within hours, it was everywhere. Local news, morning talk shows, online threads. The Grant Foundation's website crashed before noon. Investors were pulling out. One anchor's voice played over a clip of Ronan smiling at a charity gala. Sources close to the foundation allege years of fraud and coercion behind its polished image. I didn't smile. I just sat back and listened. The sound of justice had always been quieter than I expected. By noon, the chaos was total. Outside the Grant Foundation headquarters, reporters shouted over each other as staff were escorted out under questioning. Someone filmed Mrs. Grant in her car, face tight, jaw clenched. The empire was unraveling one frame at a time. Then came the counterattack. Ronan went public. He stood before cameras, immaculate in a dark suit, voice smooth as glass. "The recordings," he said, "were manipulated. My wife has been struggling emotionally. This isn't revenge, it's confusion. Please respect our family's privacy." He called me his wife again, as if the word still meant something. I watched it from my kitchen table, half a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Naomi texted almost instantly, "Do not respond." I didn't plan to. Silence had always been my sharpest blade. That afternoon, I walked to the pier, where the city's noise met the ocean's calm. The air smelled like salt and fog. Every step I took was deliberate, each one lighter than the last. By then, they were already turning on each other, Ronan and his mother, both trying to save themselves by blaming the other. Naomi handled the rest. She released the full, unedited files, timestamps, metadata, bank transfers, proof, real, undeniable. By 5 o'clock, the lie had collapsed on live television. Even the news anchors sounded stunned. A journalist called me around 6. "You're trending in 48 states," she said. "They're calling you the quiet storm." I laughed softly, but it wasn't joy. It was disbelief. Relief, maybe. The kind that hurts. As evening fell, I sat by the window and played the old recording. The one from my wedding. His laughter. The sneer. That line about my mother. I hadn't listened to it since that day. It hit differently now. For the first time, I cried. Not from pain, but release. Each tear felt earned. I whispered, "You were wrong, Mom. Sometimes silence isn't peace. It's just unfinished war." Hours later, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail. Ronan's voice, cracked and desperate. "Please, Ly. Just talk to me. We can fix this. They're tearing me apart." I listened twice, then deleted it. No reply. No closure. Just quiet. The prophecy had completed itself. He was the one begging for mercy now. By nightfall, every major network carried the fallout. Cameras caught Mrs. Grant being escorted out of her foundation's office, the crowd shouting questions she didn't answer. The headlines were merciless. Fraud allegations rock San Francisco philanthropy scene. Ronan resigned for family health reasons before sunset. The Grant name had become shorthand for betrayal. Meanwhile, messages poured into my bakery inbox, from women, mostly, some angry, some grateful. A few said, "You gave me courage." I didn't know how to respond, so I just read and breathed. That night, I unlocked the bakery doors for the first time in months. The air inside still smelled faintly of sugar and yeast. I turned on the lights, tied my old apron around my waist, and opened the recipe book, my mother's handwriting still crisp, her notes smudged with flour. I made the same pie they'd stolen, her apple cinnamon, simple, honest. When it was done, I placed it on the windowsill, just like she used to. Steam curled into the night air. "For her," I whispered. The scent filled the room. Warm, forgiving. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was release. As dawn crept in, I walked back to the pier. The water was calm again, the city behind me still humming with chaos I no longer carried. The first light of morning stretched across the bay, the same bay where I'd dropped my wedding ring. I stood there, breathing in the new air. "I didn't destroy them," I said softly. "I just stopped pretending they were worth saving." The sun rose higher, painting the water gold. The world kept turning. 3 months passed. The ocean didn't care. Waves still rose and fell with the same rhythm, the same hush. But inside me, the tide had shifted for good. Peace is strange. It feels empty when you've fought too long to get it. I stood behind the counter at my little bakery in Monterey. It was early, barely dawn. The sky was still that soft gray blue before the light breaks through. I unlocked the front door, flipped the open sign, and breathed in the scent of flour and cinnamon. Dust danced in the sunlight slicing through the windows. I wiped the counter slowly, the rag tracing patterns I didn't notice. Somewhere in the background, the radio played an old tune. I caught myself humming along. The same melody my mother used to hum when she kneaded dough. The days had grown quieter. Not normal. I don't think life ever goes back to what it was, but steady, predictable, and maybe that was enough. Near the register, a folded local paper sat half-read. The front page headline read, "Former Grant Foundation Director Convicted of Fraud, Family in Bankruptcy Talks." I stared at it for a moment, then folded it neatly and tossed it in the bin beneath the counter. No joy, no regret, just closure. The bell above the door jingled. A woman stepped in, older, dressed in soft layers and kindness. Her hands were slightly shaky as she reached for her wallet, then paused when she saw me. "You're that woman," she said, squinting gently. "From the story online, right?" I offered a soft smile. "I used to be." She smiled back, her eyes moist. She didn't need to say anything else. I boxed up a small cinnamon bun for her on the house. "Take this one. You look like someone who deserves a little sweetness today." Behind me, a tray of apple pie cooled by the window. My mother's recipe. The same one they stole. The same one that was once served to humiliate me. Now it healed. I wrapped a slice carefully and placed it on the shelf behind the counter. I didn't label it. I just whispered, "For someone who needs it." It was strange, the way time makes room for forgiveness. Not the kind you give others, but the kind you give yourself. I used to believe revenge would taste like justice. It didn't. It tasted like silence, finally honest. I didn't miss Ronan. I missed the version of me who once believed love could fix cruelty, who thought that being loyal meant staying quiet, but she had to die for me to live. Mid-morning brought a familiar knock. Naomi pushed the door open, carrying coffee in one hand and her signature smirk in the other. "Busy saving the world with baked goods?" she teased. "Only the worthy," I replied, smiling. She set the coffee down, and we hugged, wordless, solid. "You know," she said, leaning on the counter, "your story's getting picked up for some fancy streaming docuseries." "They called me for permissions yesterday." I shook my head. "Let them tell it. I'm done living it." We laughed. This time it was real. Later, after she left, I took a breath and picked up my old phone, the one I hadn't touched in months. I was about to erase its memory for good when I noticed something. One voicemail remained. It was from her. Mrs. Grant. Her voice cracked, thinner than I remembered. I should have treated her better. I see that now. You won, dear. I sat still, holding the phone in both hands. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel hate. I felt done. I deleted the message. No, I said softly. I just stopped losing. Around 4, a young woman walked in, barely in her 20s, maybe. Nervous eyes, shaking hands, a worn portfolio clutched to her chest. Hi, she began. I heard you help women start small businesses. I saw your name in an article. I didn't let her finish. I nodded and gestured to the little table in the corner. Come sit. Let's build something honest then. As she sat down and opened her folder, I saw a little bit of myself in her. Not the broken me, but the one who dared to dream before she was told not to. Later that evening, I walked to the pier, the same stretch of wood and wind where I'd once let go of a ring, and a life I no longer belonged to. The breeze was cool, brushing against my face like memory. The sunset stretched itself across the water, soft and forgiving. I stood there, eyes closed, listening to the waves. Mercy isn't forgiveness, I said aloud. It's freedom, from needing them to be sorry. I let the words settle into the air, where they didn't need to echo. No one else needed to hear them. Just me. By the end of the day, he begged for mercy. But the truth is, mercy was never his to ask for.